I will introduce our speaker in a moment, but Jason's going to open us with a moment of prayer.
Dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity to talk about disabilities and non-disabilities for that purpose. Help us to have our ears and eyes and hearts open to this conversation, better understand how we can appreciate those people in this category, as well as they can work with us and we can better understand how this all works together. We know that everything is created in your image and that people are all part of your image. We welcome this time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay, I'd like to welcome my dear friend Angela Talent. Angela's a speaker, coach, and meditation enthusiast. In addition, she founded Damaged Parents, which is an advocacy group for parents who have disabilities in order for them to be fully functioning as parents. And out of that came the Relatively Damaged podcast, where Angela interviews a number of people who have overcome various challenges in their life. And it's a great podcast. And she is also on the Sacramento County Disability Advisory Commission. Angela is joining us from Sacramento, California. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Angela this evening.
Thank you, Kat, so much for introducing me. Thank you for having me. I think it's important before I get started to let everyone know that I have 3 Chihuahuas. And if you were to come visit me in my home, they would think you're here to pet them and not hang out with me. So just want to make that clear. They're in charge. So I'm going to start our conversation today with 2 questions that I want you to ponder. How do you connect with those you know have a disability? How do you connect with those you believe aren't disabled? As I was pondering these questions, I asked myself, what could I have known about living with a disability before my disability? My entire life I'd been capable, 35 years until my disability came on. Let me take you back to the year I was born. In 1975, President Ford signed into law the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This act guaranteed free, appropriate public education to each child with a disability in every state and locality across the country. Why is this important? Because I'm going to tell you a story about doing the right thing when it comes to disability, and how it doesn't come close to what it really means to do the right thing or truly connect with those around you. When I was young, my parents were adamant. Hey, Kat, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Maybe you can mute the mic, just so our listeners online can. Okay, thank you. Oh, much better. When I was young, my parents were adamant about teaching me to do the right thing. What's the right thing? In my family, it was made clear by rules and laws. If there was a rule, you must follow it, even if it doesn't feel right. My world was very black and white. It was still fairly new in schools that those with disabilities got to participate. In my school, we were asked if we wanted to volunteer to help the class of kids with disabilities. I was super quick to raise my hand. It was the right thing to do, and there was a law. I was super happy to leave the classroom, and by leaving the classroom, showed my teachers and classmates that I was valuable and important because I was needed. I was not consciously aware of this at the time, but these were my excuses to show my importance, to prove to others I had value because I was needed, and being needed was high on my list. I had no idea at the time that I didn't think I had value unless I was needed. This is actually part of our social evolution. Matthew Lieberman, who wrote the book Social, points out that, open quote, our brains are built to practice thinking about the social world and our place in it, close quote. Our ranking and value is so important that when we finish a task, our brain turns to the default network, which starts processing social information. The brain practices thinking about our social world from infancy. That is how important our social world is to us. In my world, that meant transactions. I help you, I rack up points of value. That value was so important to me because it meant that I was important, I was needed. But my behavior said, I'm better than you. It didn't say you're human and I'm human and we are going to do this together. Ouch. What did this look like in my interactions? Well, I asked first about the disability, if I asked at all. I showed no interest in their humanness. It didn't matter so much who they were as it mattered who I was. I always had to be better in all my relationships, not just with those who had disabilities. Imagine the pressure. Can you see codependent behavior yet? I had to know and do all the right things. Connection was not part of that. Plus, it was elusive. What really is connection? How do you control for connection? How do you make connection predictable? How could I connect from this perspective? I couldn't. I didn't see my value without the tasks, and by doing those tasks, I became valuable. I did the quote unquote right thing, which was comfortable. I helped and I thought I was racking up my social value. How come I wasn't feeling fulfilled? I knew the rules. I followed them. The rules mattered. That's how I knew what was my responsibility. That's how I determined who I was and who I was not. It was easy. It was predictable because it was written down and accepted or taught about. Now, as I got older and entered the workforce, I literally read the policy and procedure manuals. So I would know the rules. This way I knew what was expected, at least on paper. Even in my marriage, I tried to follow what I thought were the rules. Get married, have kids, stay married. The marriage was horrible, filled with abuse and violence. But because the rule was you stayed married, I stayed. That is until I couldn't. Even then, I looked to my church leadership to give me the go-ahead to leave. I was still trying to follow the rules and do the quote-unquote right thing. I was outside the rules now. It was hard, and I didn't die. But it didn't feel safe to keep bucking the rules. So I went back to working in the medical field where I knew the rules. And I could rack up some social value, which I desperately needed. About 3 to 4 years into that job, I was sitting at my desk when I didn't know it, but my whole world was going to drastically change. March 7th, 2011, it was only but a moment. I was limited to working with one hand, and within a few weeks, started having problems with the other hand. And 2 months later, I was let go because I couldn't perform all of my job duties. In my world, this was evidence that I was no longer valuable. When in your life have you not felt valuable? When have you felt valuable? How did you know? So it was May, and that month my uncle died, and in June my mom announced she was moving out of state. Less than 4 months into my disability, which I hadn't even come close to accepting myself. I felt alone. I was a divorced mom with 2 young children. Before my mom announced her impending move and after, she would remind me that I was supposed to take care of her as she aged, not the other way around. We had planned since I was young that I was going to care for her. We could not see how that was going to happen, so a loss for me became a loss for her too. I could no longer perform the tasks that gave me value, and I was reminded of that on a regular basis, especially in my own mind, every time I couldn't do something. My whole world was turned upside down. The best word, alone. That's how I felt, newly disabled, single mom, just alone. No one at that point in time saw me. My lack of capacity is what they saw. It's what I saw too. But God knew something I didn't. I questioned the destruction of my identity, but I didn't even know I was questioning my identity at the time. So I found a parable that kind of sums up what was starting to happen. A teacher deliberately sinks a boat, and the student questioned it. What the student didn't know that the teacher did was that a ruthless tyrant had turned to piracy to enslave a population. The teacher bought the boat from a family on the brink of bankruptcy and destroyed his own property to save the family, prevent the piracy, and ultimately prevent war. The teacher knew. I did not. As the American poet Reynold Price wrote, when you can't escape the appending of your identity, it forces you, open quote, to be somebody else, the next viable you, a stripped down, whole other, clear-eyed person. And as Meister Eckhart says in his sermon on 1 John 4:9, open quote, God asks only that you get out of God's way and let God be God in you, close quote. I didn't know it, but I was going to get out of the way, eventually. Having a disability and the lack of use being my hands meant that I was going to get super uncomfortable because I got to learn to ask for help. Let's talk a little bit about what it means to ask for help. For me, asking for help meant there was something wrong with me. Not that there was simply something wrong physically, but there was something wrong at the inner core of who I was. Remember, I found my value in doing tasks. Now I couldn't do those tasks, which meant I had no value. I became increasingly depressed. The depression made it even harder to ask for help. Why? Because these stories that were going through my mind were that I wasn't worth it. They were so easy to believe because that was the evidence that I saw. What you look for, you will find, which I didn't know at the time. Let's think real quick about the messages we get from everyday commercials. Take this to cure that, and you will be accepted again, because whatever you have isn't supposed to exist. And now that it does exist and you have it, it is wrong and you are wrong. You must get rid of it at all costs. What about soap, clothes, makeup, heck, shaving cream? Seems to me like the unintended goals of commercials is to make you as you are wrong unless you change. Yuck. I don't see anyone here that is wrong. Let me shift back to my story. When I first got caregivers, I would micromanage how they did things. I would follow them around, giving them what Brian Fretwell calls SOFA, suggestions, opinions, feedback, and advice. I'm super lucky that they were very patient souls. I hated all those things when it came to others giving me suggestions, opinions, feedback, or advice, but I felt compelled to get them to do exactly what I needed and accept my view of the world. And the only way to do that, or so I thought, was through control. In a fantastical turn of events, my friend Jana Dudley asked me to join her in a book study of Marshall B. Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, where I learned that asking for help was a gift. What if, when asking the neighbor for sugar, you go over there as if you are giving a gift by asking? How do you feel when someone asks you for help? Isn't that a gift? My perspective changed as I started asking for help instead of telling others what they needed to do for me. There was a very important part, though, that made a huge difference and was extremely hard to implement, and that was leaving room for the other person to say no. Okay, what does accepting no, saying no, having a disability, and connecting with others have to do with uniting disability and ability? I'm so glad you asked. Remember, I always thought I needed to do the right thing, that there are laws and rules that tell us what to do. And if I don't do those things, then I don't have value. And I wanted to have value. If I believe that about myself, then what was I believing about others? If they don't do the right thing, interpret that as what I thought needed to happen, then they had no value. In essence, they were wrong. Not even they just made a mistake. They were wrong. Here comes the shame. So first I shamed myself, and then I shamed someone else. Could you imagine living in that world? At the very least, I was interacting and not connecting. What's connecting though? I've used that word a few times so far, and I think you might be like me in that you know when it happens and when it doesn't happen, but articulating the concept is difficult. Difficult may not even be the right word, maybe elusive or evasive, but you know what it is, and you know when it happens. Let's go back to learning to accept no. How come learning to accept no helped me to find value in myself and others? Well, let's investigate that. If I'm willing to accept no and I'm giving room for others to say no, then getting my needs met and meeting other needs has to change. Absolutely has to change. Something had to change. And it's really fantastic that I had met my friend Jackie years before, who had shown me what it was really like to connect and leave room for the other person to be who they are at their very core. Allowing them room to say, no, that's not me. This is me. I met Jackie at church. She is tiny and fierce and so much fun. When I met her, I was at the crux of my feeling alone. Something magical happened though. She saw me. How did I know? That feeling. One of the things she did was she treated me like she treated everyone else. When we would get together or talk on the phone, she shared her struggles with me and I shared mine with her. We always ask questions, you know, those exciting questions that come up when you're in awe or wondering about something. We would be curious about everything. I remember the first time I talked about something with her that I was afraid she was going to judge me for, and I was going to lose my value. She didn't blink an eye. She showed genuine interest in me. She kept being curious. I wasn't my hands. I wasn't the braces on my hands. I wasn't the wheelchair I needed when I needed a wheelchair. I wasn't the extra weight I had on my body at the time. I was human. I was me. These were the times I was learning the difference between transactional relationships or interactions and true connection. This behavior expanded over to my relationships with my children and caregivers. It took many years before I started to see the value in myself. I think the moment I started to find value in myself was the day I fainted. I'd never fainted before, and as I woke, I literally thought I died. And I woke up on the carpet, like wondering, am I dead? And I realized I needed to call for help. It was in that span of moments that I knew I needed to live. And what I mean by that is like not just be alive on this planet, but to be a contributor. The fall shook me to my core. And in many ways, you could say, woke me up. Around the same time, a caregiver company came in and said they were not going to help me be human. What does that mean, though? Well, according to national guidelines, the only things a caregiver needs to provide are specific and limited tasks. Make the bed, cook, light housekeeping, bathing, clothing, laundry, a few other things. The company told caregivers that they could only do the things on the list and not help be my hands or even connect with me as a person. There was actually a training about how they must not connect. I, though, was super lucky because I had caregivers who were shocked, disappointed, and saddened by the view of this company. Little did I know that what I had been learning in my friendship with Jackie, the book study with Gianna, and other areas of my life had already modified the way I did relationships. My caregivers were no longer just doing tasks. They were my hands. We worked together as a team. I don't remember when it started, but when a caregiver would first come into the house to start helping me, we would have a conversation about what caregiving is. One of the analogies I would use is that I'm not a backseat driver. You know that feeling, right? So if I'm not a backseat driver and I see something and I tell you what I see, then I'm a co-pilot. We became co-pilots together. Yes, they were here to help me. And while I have the final say on most things, they get to provide input and call me out too in a loving way. The caregivers, based on my interactions and how I treated them, also got to learn and grow. Ultimately, now we learn and grow together. We see the humanity, the value, and we connect to that part of who we are. And this is where uniting disability and ability come together. It literally happens in the deeper connection. It's in that deeper connection where we see the barriers and want to remove them because we value the person. They are no different than you or I. We are all human. We all struggle. We also all have the thought that we are doing it alone. So I'm going to ask you to ponder another question real quick. Have you ever done life alone? Look around. What did you make in the room you're sitting in? What about the clothes you're wearing? If you made something, where'd you get the supplies? One of my teachers, Susanna Bear, says the mind excels at seeing differences, but the heart sees all the ways we are similar. Look, I can tell you the right things to do for people with disabilities. Heck, you know I can tell you the laws. And you will still miss the mark because it's never really been about the disability. It's always been about the humanity and the connection. We might not be able to describe connection, but we can certainly talk about the steps to get there. Step 1, be willing to be uncomfortable. One of my favorite quotes my friend Kristen Childs told me at a pivotal time in my life was, there's no growth in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growth zone. So I'm asking you to have new behavior, which is being uncomfortable. So let's talk about cats. Why not? So some creative scientists took cats and put them in a cylinder where they were only exposed to vertical lines and another group only exposed to horizontal lines. When the cats were put back into the quote unquote regular world, they couldn't see the lines they weren't exposed to. So they couldn't see the lines they weren't exposed to. Those that only ever saw horizontal lines literally could not see the legs of chairs and would bump into them constantly. The ones that saw vertical lines could see the chair legs, but could never find a comfortable place to rest. Learning new behavior can feel uncomfortable until it isn't. That's just the way it is. For me, for instance, if I were one of the cats, connection, like the legs of the chair, existed, but I had only heard about it and not seen it. So I had to be willing to believe that connection existed when I hadn't experienced it and known it to be true, which meant super uncomfortable. Being unconditionally loved and loving unconditionally, maybe these words get us closer to what connection means. Regardless, unconditional love and connection were foreign concepts to me. How willing are you to be uncomfortable? On a side note, I recently had a conversation with my daughter where she said, "What do you think? I can't change?" And I responded back without thinking and said, "It's impossible not to change." This is when I realized that change is inevitable. And if that's the case, then it would help if I were consistently willing to be uncomfortable. It would make this journey of life on earth a bit easier. Part of learning new behavior is also understanding who you are. Don't worry, it's uncomfortable too. Here's one thing I did to help me see myself. I set a random reminder and asked myself, what character am I playing? Every time the alarm went off, I was laughing within a few hours. Why? Because what I learned was that in my mind, I was doing the very thing I was judging others as doing. To keep myself in check, I still have that alarm. Step 2, be curious. I love this old proverb. It is very difficult to find a black cat in a dark room, especially when there is no cat. It's super exciting too. Curiosity is necessary to find new things. In Stuart Firestein's book, Ignorance, he says, lawyers don't make scientific discoveries by accident. Only scientists do. That's because their curiosity is driving them to screw around with things to see what will happen. And often it is true. The thing they find is not what they were looking for, but something unexpected and more interesting. Close quote. That just sounds like fun to me. What happens if you take that mindset and apply it to your conversations? What if every single conversation could be an exploration? I don't know about you, but I don't spend every minute of every day with the people I love. And even if I did, their internal world is going to be different than mine. I hope I get to be surprised. I better be surprised. That's what makes our relationships fun. One of the ways I do this is to check my assumptions. If someone tells me they were excited about something, I ask them what that means to them instead of applying my definition. This is where those super fantastic surprises come in. Step 3, be willing to fail. The second law of thermodynamics or entropy says there's only a few ways to get it right and many ways to fail. Think about your house. How many ways can it be messy? Innumerable, right? How many ways can it be clean? Only a few. As you get good at being uncomfortable and staying curious, you're going to fail. It's literally the law. I can follow this one. Welcome it. We are all fumbling around anyhow. We may as well celebrate it. It is in these steps that we unite disability and ability in that deeper connection. In the New Testament, it says, and I like to paraphrase, where 2 or more are gathered, there I am. That's where I want to be, in God's presence. Ooh, maybe that's another way to define connection. And we all want to feel connected. So we're all thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to spend more time connecting. Then you start walking out the door and your brain takes you to that moment you miserably failed at connecting, or someone refused your bid for connection. Do you stop in fear? No, because you know what courage is. Connecting takes courage, and courage can't exist without fear. It just can't. Now, when that fear comes up, remind yourself you're gaining a new understanding of courage. Connection can and will feel vulnerable at times, not just for you, but for the person you are connecting with also. You will need to show them you are truly interested in them. You will be tested. You will be uncomfortable. You will fail. And if you stay willing to be uncomfortable, curious, and fail, you will connect. After all, out beyond the ideas of loneliness and fear, there is connection. I'll meet you there. Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to hear your stories about connecting and what you've done well, or at least what didn't suck the last time.
Thank you so much, Angela. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to end our live stream. But please stay on, and I will connect the other camera so you can see everybody and we'll have a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.